welcome to the Lawyer Life podcast, where we seek to navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. In today's episode of Lawyers at Home Sharing Coffee, we discuss privilege, belonging, and pandemic working. I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hello, Darlene.
Hello.
Is it an iced coffee because of the wonderful weather we're having?
No, I don't do iced coffee so much unless I'm driving around, and I'm not doing that today for this podcast.
I think a lot less driving around going on.
There is a lot less driving around, and I have to say it's causing some safety issues. I think people are not quite remembering how driving goes. I've had a couple of near misses, one with my kids that was very scary. And myself too, just feeling like I'm out of practice or something. I don't know. Have you had that, or is that just?
Yeah, no. A couple weeks ago when I drove, it hadn't been a while, I did feel a bit weird about it. Felt like back when Mike was 16 and what have you. Yeah, for sure. And speaking of out of practice, our audio is not in normal practice because my microphone cord broke, and I'm using a different microphone that's not as good. And we're going to try to sweeten it in post, as they say. But my apologies for the difference in audio quality compared to normal. So we'll get that done off the top. Deep breath. A lot going on in the world right now.
Yes.
Lots and lots. We're obviously talking about the murder of George Floyd and what has come from that in the U.S. and Canada and otherwise. I think a really important, passionate conversation about privilege and race. And it marks almost exactly a year since we did an episode with Catherine Chang about belonging in the profession. And so just at the beginning of all this, I'd like to say we're going to repost that episode. It's great. It's one of our highest rated episodes. Catherine is brilliant. It's obviously more focused on the everyday elements of practicing law if you're in a marginalized group. But it does have a lot of great takeaways and descriptions of what it's like to be someone in a marginalized position in the profession and what those in more majority positions can do to help. And so encourage everybody to go back, give that a listen. In these times, I think it is useful to say the least. Any thoughts on that, on Catherine's episode?
I mean, I agree. I think it's something I would rather let Catherine talk about it for some of the reasons we've mentioned before on the podcast. Like, we are two privileged white people and we do not have the insight. And so we're really talking from the sidelines, I guess, and then trying to figure out how we, don't sit on the sidelines. Right, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Don't expound on your opinions, but also don't sit on the sidelines when it counts, and find the right ways to do that. And it's she gives great tips on just the daily slights almost, and the daily I guess violence, right, of little things. And then right now we're dealing with the violence of something very, very big.
I think a lot of people are dealing with the tough question of what do I do about all this right now. For those of us that are not members of the Black community, that can be a difficult question. And because we have this platform, I think it's important, even though we are two privileged white people, to at least acknowledge what's going on. I know that I have tried to find my own ways of evaluating my life and seeing if I am helping those who don't have the privilege that I do. I continue that evaluation. This week, I took some steps specific to what's going on. But I think what's more important than this week, this month, the next few months, however long this issue continues to go on, we find sustainable ways for ourselves, professionally, personally, to continue to acknowledge and understand the true privilege that we do have, and do something positive to try to lift folks up that don't benefit from those same advantages. Catherine talks about really simple ways that we might not think about being privileged. That's something as simple as feeling like we belong in a meeting room versus somebody who doesn't, and the difference that can happen in a profession, in a career when that's the case often. There's a lot of small things. There's also some larger things where privilege can help save your life versus somebody without it in certain interactions. So obviously, this is an ongoing issue, an ongoing conversation. To the extent I will say this, that anybody feels that I could be of assistance, please reach out to me through the many channels available, LinkedIn, email, what have you, and let me know, because I am constantly interested in helping. And that's one of the reasons why I at least went into law, is because I felt like I was given a lot of um, advantage. Um, and I wanted to help folks who didn't have those same advantages coming up. So that's my piece.
I think what you've just said is very important. The thing that really speaks to me from what you just said is that I admire that you are boldly saying that. And I think the fact that we're having this discussion here is just, it's awkward to talk about it. And I think what we're trying to do is to not stay quiet for fear of saying the wrong thing. Well, I will probably say the wrong thing. You're very, very good about these things. But I mean, I think there's a lot to be learned. And I think unless you're willing to kind of put your neck out there and say, okay, I might use the wrong word, I might say the wrong thing, I might not have, I might show my ignorance, like show it, then we can fix it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. And creating a climate like we're always trying to do on this podcast, just like, let's talk. I think that maybe we could just try to all figure out where our biases are, where our ignorance is. I've certainly had a bunch of books suggested to me this week, which we can probably tag some of them in the show notes, by authors on these topics. One in particular is called So You Want to Talk About Race. Actually, we'll put it in the show notes. It seems great. That's one that is going to be helpful, I hope. And I think there's a lot to be read. I think you can support the authors doing this good work by buying the books. Anyway, I'm on a tangent.
Yeah, it seems small, but just speaking about books, we ordered specifically some books for our daughter, who's 3.5, to make sure that we're diversifying, the books we read to her. And last week we read a book to her about a girl who the first day she wears a hijab to school, and it's a great kids book, wonderful. Daughter loves it, and this week we were going by actually a Baptist church that had big mural on the side of it was basically like a kid's painting of all these different sorts of folks. And my daughter picked out the girl that was wearing a hijab in this big mural and said, "Oh, that girl's wearing a beautiful purple hijab. I love that." And we kept working, and that's like, oh, this stuff really, 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 really makes a difference. Like
Mm-hmm.
it matters. And now my daughter has that interaction with somebody who wears a headscarf where she doesn't, has obviously a very positive view of it, and it's normalized for her. And that's just one
Yeah.
small step, but that's like, my daughter's little, and that can really add up to a different perspective on things in life. So small things do help.
And it's not a small thing, actually. It's a big thing because the media narrative is one of the biggest problems here, right? Like, I think once all of this has come up, I mean, this has come up so many times. There are so many incidents of police brutality, police killings, murder of people who are doing very day-to-day things and should never ever lead to this result. And we are just inured to it as a society by seeing it on television news. And I think that for people who we live in a very, very cosmopolitan city with or I live in a very cosmopolitan city. You get to see all different colors of people doing all different kinds of things every day, plus the media. But there's vast swaths of the country where they don't know any people of color. They don't know a Black person. They don't know someone who wears a hijab personally. And so the media, becomes the only source of information unless it's taught in schools or parents are taking it on themselves to give a more balanced perspective. So I think it's mission critical, really. Like, it's not a small thing. You have to teach your kids those stories so that they don't pick them up in the ether where they're not well handled a lot of the time. There's just tons of stereotypical And even in movies and TV sometimes, right? Like you have to be thoughtful about those choices as well.
Yeah. I
Maybe you could recommend the books in the show notes too that
Yes,
you're
I
using.
will. I'll put the books in that we received. There's a feeling of powerlessness a little bit. How would I change this massive problem? But there are small things we can do in our lives to try to improve the lives for at least those that we touch, and that can make a cumulative effect. And as well, lawyers, we are above even being generally a privileged set because of our profession and income level and power that the profession just provides to you. Um, we do have, whether it's relationships, occupations, or other things that affect policy and the way that
Mhm.
our governments work. And we see what happens when the country's highest ranking lawyer walks with the president and with a massive breach of the First Amendment. Like that is, there's a great poem called Notes for My Son that a teacher in high school passed along to me that I to this day I still hold really close. And one of the lines in that poem, it basically says that for lack of a joiner's conviction, there'll be no crucifixion today. Which basically says, if
Mhm.
the carpenter didn't, build the cross, there wouldn't be a crucifixion. And religion aside, the obvious the metaphor is, sometimes it does take the yes from a certain person to allow something to occur. And there are gatekeepers, and we are often lawyers the gatekeeper in important uh, situations, whether it's policy related or even large corporate decisions. And we can be champions of diversity. We can do a lot of things because of the nature of our standing in organizations and our profession. And so with that comes a responsibility, I think, to make the efforts that we can um, uh, to to help solve this problem in the ways that are available to us. The other thing I just want to say is, like, in this conversation of empowering um, folks that don't have the same privilege as us, I think a lot of the time the mentality is, well, if I help other people, that means that I lose. And that's
Mhm.
not the case at all. It's, I think, a speaking point that's used by people who just don't want equality to exist. And I think it's the raising tides float all boats thing. There is no harm to you as a privileged person in helping create a police force where all people are looked upon by police officers in the same way. That doesn't hurt you at all. We're just helping folks that are being prejudiced by police currently. There's a lot of examples of that, and so um, there's not a scarcity issue here. There's just an issue of, we need to make sure that all folks are being given substantially similar opportunities and accommodating to make sure that there's substantive equality and not just the appearance of equality. Lots going on in this chat.
I feel like we have a lot of work to do. I really do. I think it's a lot. I saw I was very heartened that there were two women in the music industry who came up with this idea of Blackout Tuesday, where everyone would ponder how they could better support racial equality, and I would say ways that they can use their power, considerable power, really, over culture to help. And I'm really interested. I don't know if have you seen any outcomes from that? Has anyone published a statement of what they're going to do?
I saw, well, to start, because we work in the music industry, I did see many people observing it, which was I think
Mhm.
really inspiring and a good indication that people are taking time to consider things.
I think a lot of little kids grow up looking at music videos and thinking that's what success looks like. That's what the world looks like. And particularly kids like me, I grew up in a very small town. My view of what cities looked like was from music videos and movies and TV. And as the gatekeepers of culture, we look back on some of the stuff that was in 80s movies and we're like, ugh, really? You know,
Yeah,
like, wish that hadn't been in there. I mean, there are certain movies, I mean, even we might have talked about it on this podcast, but I watched John Hughes movies when I was a kid, and I think there's some very overt racism in those movies
For
that was
sure.
just like everywhere in the 80s, and people just were like, yeah, that's cool. And there was date rape, there was there was all kinds of stuff in those movies that we thought was reality, and that was purveyed by the people who make them. So I think you can only be as good as the time that you're in, but I think it's also like you could look at videos and these things that people that really shape their views of human beings and how we interact with each other, and you could say, hey, I'm going to maybe take a lighter hand with the glorifying certain types of things. Like
Totally.
I think that's one thing the music industry could be huge at. The cool thing about the music industry is that there is a fair amount of diversity in the ranks of having been on the inside. Like there is some diversity. And I think that that's a source of huge strength, and we can do some real things. So I'm hoping that it's learning, it's being open-minded, it's being like, okay, where am I wrong? How can I do better? How am I like having those hard conversations of like, how am I making life worse for you by me not understanding what your experience is? Or is there some little thing, like I was saying, or like Catherine talks about in our podcast with her, these little acts that are so hurtful that you don't even see. Um, Asking about that and being prepared for kind of a painful answer, like that's definitely part of it. But then there's these huge things of like, hey, you know what? People look at race in part because of the way we depict it in our videos. So can we be more conscious about how we do that? Like
Yeah.
that would be good.
Yeah. We talk about it in Catherine's episode, and I think it's true as well. Is the easiest thing to do is listen, and even if you don't know what to say because you're not, used to having these sort of conversations, the beginning is just asking questions and listening from people who want to share and who want to help. You know, that listening is important. Also, doing some work on your own. There's a lot of resources available. We've spoken about a few that we'll link to in our notes, but we can all take some steps to educate ourselves and to improve ourselves. And after all, that's what this podcast is all about. I mean, we've talked about high performance and all these things that we are planning to do to make ourselves better. This is an important one as well, is to look around and appreciate the advantages that we have been given just by nature of who we were born to, or where we were born, or what our name is. I mean, I could list off a million just on my own part. Look around, understand those, see how other people don't have those same benefits, and try to put ourselves in the shoes of others, building that architecture of empathy, which we've spoken about before, to try to help fix these problems. And at the same time, the pandemic continues. We are working from home with our children, our loved ones, all the whatever situation we're in. I would say this continues to be um, pandemic living continues to be an ongoing challenge. And uh, on that note, anything new to share, Darlene, on how your existence has been for the past couple weeks?
Well, you can hear it because the pandemic has two little recording friends who are continuously opening the door to this room where I'm trying to record this podcast. And you can hear them in the background. Um, you know, it evolves. Every week is a different experience of the pandemic. Anyway, how are you doing? Are you still having the early mornings? Are you finding a way
Yeah, our son's
through?
sleeping a little bit better, which is making a huge difference. Uh, the great weather is helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's the same old, more or less on our side. We continue.
Yeah. I mean, there's not really any other option. One step at a time, 1 hour at a time some days, but moving forwards.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, we'll take a break and we'll come back with our goods and grapes.
The Lawyer Life podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law. Inter alia lawyers have big firm training, in-house experience, and a wide range of expertise in technology, media, and entertainment. Our advice is business-focused, speedy, and practical. To learn more, visit interalialaw.com. That's interaliaa-law.com.
And we are back with our goods and grapes. Goods are things we want to promote and support, and grapes are things that annoy us, meant to be insignificant. Darlene, do you have a good?
I think the good for me this week is just the sharing of literature in a spirit of cooperation, in addition to some of the other initiatives that we talked about. But I think it's good just to put up our hands and say, hey, I need to learn more generally about everything in life. I'm always supportive of that. And no one will be worse off, I don't think, for that initiative. Can all benefit. But that would be my good. How about you?
My good is, I think, applying this new lens, this improved lens, I should say, on life, in view of what's going on. So since I think maybe 2 weeks into the pandemic, I live in like this like kind of small town. There's been a couple, they're like maybe 30, and they walk the neighborhood post dinner time blatantly with glasses of wine in their hands, like just on their walk, having a glass of wine. And I have found that to be hilarious. I have like been like, good for them. Like, that is to me kind of like a symbol of the pandemic. Now, having considered the issues more closely, where people can't even go for a jog in their neighborhood without potentially getting killed because of the color of their skin. I now look at that couple differently and think, my goodness, like you are so lucky that this is like funny, and I am near positive that if their skin wasn't white, that whether because they would self-regulate or somebody would speak up, that's not happening for months on end. And so another example, something insignificant and maybe funny, started as a good for me, but now I have a different perspective on.
It always comes back to that: when you know better, you do better, right? Unless you can see that, unless you see it, you just don't see it. But then once you see it, you can't unsee it. You have to be like, oh yeah, I will never lose this lens. That's the good thing about it.
Yeah.
I have a Mike Anderson-esque gripe.
Oh, I can't wait.
And it relates to a garden. So as you know, I process difficult situations through manual labor, it seems, during this pandemic. So I've finished largely painting in my house, as I've discussed on previous podcasts, and I've tackled the garden, which has been a bit of a project on my to-do list for a couple of years. And my gripe is that I ordered, thinking that that this is a good idea. I ordered plants from Home Depot online, and a couple of issues, user error being one. I ordered huge plants.
Oh, cool.
Online, I have a major issue with sizing of online plants. I did not realize that there were like dwarf varieties of plants and ginormous varieties of plants. So my garden is of a giant type of nature that was not as envisioned. However, I'm rolling with it. I planted them, and I am just going to see how it goes. But I got it done. It's been enjoyable. I like gardening. Maybe this gardening podcast that you've discussed before could be a real thing. Maybe that's our next venture.
I'm sure it exists. By update on that, my grass is doing really well, and it gives me immense joy. And the last thing I'd like to say as we head out, this is the beginning of Pride Month. So happy Pride Month, Darlene. And I'm sure we'll pick on that in the next episode.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon.
That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast, and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section, or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.